The blue light from the screen catches the edge of a ceramic mug on the kitchen table. Outside, a stray car passes, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling before leaving the room in shadow again. You look at the message, the letters clear against the gray background, then turn the phone face down. The silence that follows does not feel empty. It feels deliberate, a small wall built between this moment and the next. It happens without a grand decision or an angry thought, just a sudden turning away from the world. You simply set the device aside, intending to answer when the right words form, but the hours begin to slide away. The notification remains there, an unmade choice resting quietly in the background of your evening. For the person on the other side, the two small check marks have changed color, signaling that their thoughts reached your eyes. But on your side, the text sits like an open book left on a bench, waiting for a reader who walked away. You might be sitting on a bus, watching rain strike the window, or sorting through clothes that need washing. The urge to step away from the conversation isn't born from malice or a desire to cause pain. It stems from a quiet weight that settles when an answer is expected of you, a demand for your presence that you cannot meet. The text arrived while you were doing something ordinary, perhaps boiling water or tying a shoe. Instead of bringing a sense of closeness, the sudden arrival of another person's voice creates a wall of tension. The convenience of a digital line means anyone can step into your mind at any hour without knocking. When the alert sounds, it carries a silent expectation for a performance, a requirement to be clear or engaging. You feel a sudden need to step back, to protect the quiet boundaries of your current thoughts from being altered. Leaving the words unanswered becomes a way to regain control over your immediate surroundings, to say no to an uninvited presence. Sometimes the text is simple, asking how your week has been or if you want to meet for coffee on Friday. You feel that if you open the message fully, you will be pulled out of your skin and into their world. So you leave it floating in the digital ether, a small ghost that you choose not to look at directly. The phone stays where it is, dark and heavy, a small object containing an entire relationship that you are pausing. You tell yourself that you are just taking a breath, a temporary pause to gather your thoughts. But as the clock moves past midnight, the pause turns into a boundary that feels harder to cross. You think about what you ought to say, turning the potential sentences over like smooth stones in your hand. One option seems too cold, another sounds far too eager, and a third feels like an imitation of someone else. The mind starts to spin around the tiny text, analyzing how every syllable might be received on the other end. You worry that a misplaced comma or a cold tone will reveal an insecurity you are not ready to share. This endless turning of thoughts doesn't bring you closer to an answer. It only deepens the stillness. The longer the message sits, the larger the task becomes, until a simple reply feels like moving a mountain. You tell yourself that you will write back tomorrow when your mind is clearer and the words flow easily. But tomorrow arrives with its own noises, and the unanswered text sinks further down the list, weighted by your delay. You have always been highly aware of how you appear to the people around you, adjusting your tone to fit the room. On a screen, this constant adjustment requires an exhausting amount of care and editing. You write a sentence, look at it, then clear the screen until it is blank again. The person you want to present must look calm, balanced, and perfectly composed. But the act of drafting and discarding makes you lose track of what you actually wanted to say in the beginning. When you cannot find the perfect expression, disappearing feels safer than sending an imperfect piece of yourself. It is easier to let the conversation die in silence than to risk being misunderstood or judged for a clumsy phrase. Underneath the silence lies a deep hesitation regarding how the other person will view your absence or your words. You worry that they will find your true thoughts boring or that they will see through your polite exterior. By not replying, you create a barrier of ambiguity. If they are upset, it is because you are busy, not because you are flawed. The silence protects you from the vulnerability of an actual exchange where you might say the wrong thing. Yet, the unanswered text remains in your mind, a tiny anchor, pulling at your attention throughout the day. Every time you see their name or open the application, a small wave of guilt washes over the quiet of your room. You are trying to preserve your peace, but the lingering unfinished business ends up draining the very energy you sought to keep. The modern world tells us we are always reachable. That distance has been erased by strings of data. But human hearts still move at the speed of old seasons, needing time to digest, to withdraw, to simply sit still. When you disappear from a conversation, you are often trying to slow the clock down to a manageable pace. You are seeking a moment where nothing is asked of you, where your screen does not demand an emotional investment. The person waiting for your reply might think you are indifferent or that they did something to push you away. They do not see the quiet fatigue that makes you stare at the wall instead of typing a response. They do not know that your silence is often a sign of how much care you are trying to force into a simple message. As you sit in the quiet room, the phone screen darkens completely, blending into the dark wood of the table. The desire to withdraw is an honest one, a reflection of a world that asks for too much of your attention. But the silence we choose to leave behind is rarely as peaceful as we hope it will be. It carries a quiet echo, a reminder of the person who reached out and found only an empty screen. The modern interface turns social connections into instant transactions, removing the natural spaces we need to gather our thoughts. We are forced to react rather than respond, creating a culture of hyperavailability that our minds were never designed to handle. When every message demands an immediate piece of your energy, retreating into complete silence feels like the only viable defense. Yet, this digital isolation builds an invisible debt, where the anxiety of avoiding the text becomes heavier than the text itself. We mistake the absence of interaction for actual rest, forgetting that genuine peace requires clarity rather than constant avoidance. The next time a message arrives and the urge to vanish takes hold, you might choose to stay a moment longer. You might send a clumsy, imperfect sentence instead of waiting for the perfect words that never come. You might let yourself be seen in your fatigue, rather than isolating behind a wall of unanswered text. There is a distinct bravery in allowing your unpolished, unedited thoughts to occupy space in a world obsessed with curation. By embracing the friction of an imperfect response, you break the cycle of anxiety that thrives in the spaces of your delay. Real human connection does not require a flawless performance. It simply requires the willingness to show up as you are. Subscribe if you want to notice these habits sooner. Subscribe if you would rather look closer at what is running underneath the quiet choices we make every day. If you prefer to examine the hidden machinery operating beneath your daily routines, consider staying here. We live in a world that constantly encourages us to move faster, ignoring the internal rhythms that demand stillness. Understanding these silent behavioral loops is the first step toward regaining control over your time and your peace. The choices we make in the shadow of our digital screens shape the reality of our relationships and our internal world. Let us choose to look closer at the silent patterns we build before they become the walls that define us completely.